And so we have to understand Daniel 9 because it's prior revelation that they would have been aware of, that I think John would have known well, and it would have been taught to the early church. And when the book of Revelation comes, there is some prior knowledge that needs to be understood. And Daniel provides this framework for the book of Revelation. So let's look at Daniel 9 and walk through it a little bit. Daniel 9, chapter 1, or Daniel chapter 9, verse 1. Again, chapter 6 of Revelation, we're going to begin the tribulation. So that's why we're stopping now to talk about Daniel 9. So Daniel 9, Daniel is in Babylon. He was part of the first exile. Daniel and his three friends, the brightest and best, that were taken. There were three exiles, right? There were 3 times that Nebuchadnezzar came and attacked and took people captive. The first time, 605, next time 597, third time 586. In 605, Daniel and his 3 friends are brought into Babylon. Daniel's there for nearly 70 years. And he realizes that the 70-year, as he's reading Jeremiah, look at chapter 9, verse 1. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of Median descent, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans, in the first year of the reign, I, Daniel, observed in the books the number of the years which was revealed, as the word of the Lord to Jeremiah the prophet. So Daniel, probably in his 80s by now, right? And he's still learning new things. I'd like that to be of me when I'm 80 years old, still studying the scripture, still learning new things. And Daniel's 80 years old or more, and he's learning new things and realizing, as he's reading the prophet Jeremiah, my son's name's Jeremiah, but I hope he doesn't have the ministry of Jeremiah the prophet, who's known as the what prophet? The weeping prophet, right? Because he brought this message to the 2 southern tribes, that you're going to be taken in captivity by Babylonian Empire. You're going to be destroyed. Jeremiah 25:11-12, possibly what he was reading. This whole land shall become a ruin and a waste, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon. This is Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, saying, for 70 years. Then after the 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, the land of the Chaldeans, for their iniquity, declares the Lord, making the land an everlasting waste. Some have argued you go to ancient Babylon today, it's still an everlasting waste, right? There's a judgment upon them. By the way, what's his name? Iraq. Saddam Hussein tried to rebuild Babylon. You can look on a Google map and see the remains of Babylon. The palace that he tried to build, the Ishtar Gate placed there, yet it's still a laid wasteland. It's not been rebuilt. Some think it will never be rebuilt because of this prophecy of Jeremiah. Well, 70 years is mentioned. Jeremiah 29:10. For thus says the Lord, when 70 years have been completed, I will visit you and fulfill my good word to you to bring you back to this place. 2 Chronicles 36:21 is kind of a summary statement of what happened after the fact, right? To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. Why were they in Babylon? They didn't, the Sabbath year, right? The year of Jubilee, were there to leave the land unplanted, and God saying, well, you didn't do this, so I'm going to take 70 years that you owe me. 490 years, you didn't one time in those 490 years leave the land fallow without being planted. And so I'm going to take you into captivity to make the land 70 years unplanted. So Daniel's realization, 70 years is over, or it's coming to an end. So what does he do? He prays. He prays out to God, verses 3-19. A quick outline of that. He acknowledges God's loving kindness, right? God's chesed, right? His loyal love, his unfailing love, that God is faithful to his covenant. God is faithful to his promises. And then Daniel confesses Israel's corporate sin as a nation, as a people. He says, we sinned. We did wrong. We were wicked. We rebelled and abandoned your commandments. You've been faithful. We've not. And then he juxtaposes or contrasts the faithfulness of God to the lack of covenant fidelity of the nation of Israel. And then he says God's judgment upon Israel for infidelity is correct. He's right to do that. And finally, Daniel's prayer of mercy. So he's calling out for mercy, not justice, not what they deserve, but mercy after the 70 years. So that's Daniel's prayer. A long prayer, but before Daniel ends his prayer, he receives an answer from an angel. Angel Gabriel comes with an answer while he's still praying. And the answer is good news and bad news. Right? The good news is, yes, the 70 years is up, and you'll be able to go back to the land. The bad news is there's 70 times 7 years in the future. And we call this, I prefer to use the word heptad rather than weeks. You've heard the term 70 weeks of Daniel. Well, what is a heptad? Well, a heptad comes from the Hebrew noun shavuim and can literally be translated sevens. Shavuim, sevens. But some versions, in my opinion, cause confusion by translating it weeks, a lot of versions. And to avoid confusion, because a week is 7 days. Right? It's not 7 years, it's 7 days. So it can be very confusing to introduce this term weeks. And so although it's commonly used, I prefer to use the technical term heptad, which is 7 somethings. So what is the Hebrew noun translated heptad, or translated week, is recorded 20 times in the Old Testament, and is used to speak of 7 periods of time. It could be 7 days, could be 7 weeks, could be 7 months, or 7 years. So which is it? Well, context determines or dictates, in my opinion, that the divine author had 7 years in mind, as most futurists recognize, right? 7 years. So 70 times 7, or 70 heptads. So a heptad's a year, 7 years. So 70 times 7 heptads. So that is 1 heptad equals 7 years. So 70 times 7 heptads it would be, or 70 heptads would be 490 years. So we're going to see that it's broken down into 483 years, and then 1 heptad is left. 1 more heptad. 1 more period of 7 years. So now let's get back to Daniel 9. We're getting close to Daniel 9, 24 to 27. Oh, that's background. But I think Daniel 9:2, in my opinion, when you look at a map, you see a key at the bottom left-hand corner, right? What's the key? Helps you to interpret the map. Well, I think Daniel provides us with a key to interpretation, and that is he understood Jeremiah's prophecy to be literal 70 years. And he was right. They were going to go back to, Cyrus was going to issue a decree that they could go back to the land and rebuild the temple, and Artaxerxes is going to issue a decree that they can go back and rebuild the temple and rebuild the walls under Nehemiah. So Daniel interpreted this literally, and he was right to do so. And I think we need to interpret the 70 heptads, the 490 years, literally as well. Then there's an overview in verse 24. We'll get to that. An overview of the whole period of time, the whole 490 years. What's its purpose? Then we have the first 69 heptads in verse 25, right, the first 483 years. Then in verse 26, we have events between the 483 years and the last 7 years. So there's some in-between events that, and we're going to go into more detail on this, but between the 69th heptad and the 70th heptad. Then there's the 70th heptad. By the way, the church doesn't exist at all in the first 483 years. Right? The first 69 heptads, the church is not in existence and was not a part of the first 69 heptads. That I could add that, make that my 10th reason for a pre-tribulational rapture. The church wasn't there for the first 483 years or the first 69 heptads. I don't think it'll be there for the 70th heptad either. So now let's go back through verses 24 to 27. Right? And what we're going to have to look at is these three arrows. Right? The first arrow, what starts the first 69 heptads, or the first 483 years? What ends the first 483 years? And then what begins the last heptad, the last 7 years? And then what happens at the midpoint of that last 7 years? Right? Those arrows we need to identify in Daniel 9, I think 25 to 27 is going to identify that for us. So let's start in verse 24. 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and your holy city. So this angel Gabriel begins by saying to Daniel that these 70 heptads, or these 490 years, remember they were in captivity for 70 years, but they're going to be in captivity, not captivity, but under the reign of Gentile nations for another 490 years before the kingdom is established, right? And he gives 6 reasons for the 490 years, or for the 70 heptads. The first 3 are negative, right? And the second 3 are positive. First 3 reasons appear to deal with Israel's sin problem. The second 3 reasons are concerning the ushering in a kingdom characterized by righteousness. Again, the church has nothing to do with either punishment for rebellion or preparation for inheritance of the land. The inheritance of the land, again, I think is for the Jewish people. So the reasons for the 3 reasons: negative, to finish the transgressions. I think that's, transgression may be a reference to corporate sin, the sins of the nation of Israel as a whole. And in Romans 11 talks about this period of time where we're in a period of hardening now, where until the fullness of the Gentiles. But then the deliverer will come from Zion. Zion is Jerusalem. He will remove that godliness from Jacob. This is my covenant with them when I will take away their sins. But there will be a judgment. So the 70 heptads are to finish the transgressions, to seal the sins. I think transgressions is a corporate sin. I think seal the sins may be a reference to personal, individual sin. And pay for iniquity is the third reference here. And so the first 3 are dealing with rebellion and sins against God. The third one may be focusing more on guilt. Then the positive reasons. Why the 490 years, at the end of the 490 years, nearing the end, it will bring in righteousness. It will prepare for the kingdom that Christ is going to come with and bring and install a righteous kingdom. It's going to seal up the vision. Right? That's the vision that Daniel's recorded in the book of Daniel. The visions recorded to Daniel or told to him about these Gentile nations, about the coming of the Son of Man in the clouds, all of these visions that are fulfilled through the 490 years, and to anoint the holy place, a place that's going to be where Christ rules and reigns from Jerusalem. I don't think this is insignificant either. Right? There are 490 years, the kingdom of Israel. Remember, for 490 years, they did not leave the land, offer it back to God for each of those years. And so for 70 years, they were in captivity. And now it's going to talk about 77s again, heptads. So 490 more years. So it's not insignificant that there were 490 years, kingdom of Israel, the Babylonian captivity, 70 years, then another 490 years predicted. What starts the first 70 heptads, the first 69 heptads, and what ends it? Well, look at verse 25. So we're now to know and discern that from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Messiah, the Prince, 7 heptads and 62 heptads. So add that together, that's 69 heptads. I think it's just a literary way of saying 69 heptads. will be built again with the plaza and moat, even in times of distress. So what begins it? The issuing of a decree to rebuild Jerusalem. What ends it? The entrance of the Messiah. Posted on Canvas, Harold Honer, who was the department head of the New Testament department for many years here, who's now with the Lord. He was an expert in chronology. He has like a 6 volumes, 6 journal articles that were in BibSac that's now in a book. I uploaded one article that deals with this, the timing, the chronology from the issuing of a decree until Jesus enters into Jerusalem on the triumphal entry. And he calculates to the day, the 483 years. And you can have access to that on Canvas. So there were 4 decrees made, right? 4 decrees made. So how do we know which of those 4 starts it? Well, the first decree was by Cyrus. It was to rebuild the temple. Second decree was by Darius. Again, it involved rebuilding the temple. Still hadn't been finished. The third decree is Artaxerxes. Again, rebuilding the temple. But the fourth decree was also by Artaxerxes. This time it was Nehemiah building the walls. Okay. So which of these 4 decrees starts this timetable, the first 69 heptads or first 483 years? Well, the criteria is the words plaza and moat are used here, right? That indicate there will be rebuilding defenses, not just temple, but defenses. Okay. Second criteria, the rebuilding was done during times of distress, verse 25, and then the end of the 69 weeks, or the 483 years, must end with the entrance of the Messiah, right? Some point in Jesus' life. And Honer points it out to be the triumphal entry. So 1, 2, and 3 represents on this chart the 3 criteria that Honer gives, and I think he's right from this text. The criteria. So the first criteria was does it involve defense systems? Right? And Cyrus is no, it's the temple only. Darius is no. Artaxerxes' first degree, no. But Artaxerxes' second decree, where Nehemiah goes back and rebuilds the walls, involves defenses. Second, is it during time of distress? Well, we don't know about the first 3. We do know Nehemiah had many antagonists threatening him, and they had to protect the walls while they're also building the walls, protect the city while they're building. Then finally, does it end with Jesus entering into Jerusalem? First 3 don't, but the 4th does. So Honer has identified the 4th decree to be the starting of the timetable. And then, and here he has it as 444, approximately 444 BC. So from the issuing of a decree to rebuild Jerusalem, 444 BC, until the Messiah comes, 33 AD. And of course, BC and AD were invented by the Catholics at one point. And so you have to go back to the Jewish calendar, 13 months, and you have to take in consideration 0, right? Going from BC to AD, that 0 year. And he's done that, all that math in that journal article you can read. And to the day, April 3rd, AD 33 is what he times it. Pretty fascinating that it could come to the very day. It fulfilling prophecy very specifically. Then the events of Daniel 9:26. What are some of those events? This is in the gap between the end of the 69th heptad and when does the 70th heptad begin? Well, the events between 69th and 70th, the anointed one is cut off. The triumphal entry is Sunday or Monday, some say Monday. Well, within a week, he's cut off. So that's happening in this gap period between the end of the 69th heptad and the beginning of the 70th. The people of the leader will destroy the city. Who's the people of the leader? Well, who's going to destroy the city? AD 70, who destroys the city? Titus leads a rebellion, well, destroys the rebellion and destroys Jerusalem and the temple. Right? Who's the people? The Romans. The people of the leader to come. Who's the leader to come? This coming Antichrist will be some sort of leading a revived Roman Empire, Remember back to Daniel 2, the toes, the 10 toes, and Daniel 7, the fourth terrifying beast with 10 horns, right? So the people, referring to some sort of Romans, Titus is that leader who will destroy the city. That's been fulfilled. So the cutting off of Messiah has been fulfilled. The destroying the city has been fulfilled. Destroying the sanctuary, the temple has been fulfilled. In fact, go to Rome today. Has anybody been to the Titus's arch here? This was made to remind the victory of Titus destroying Jerusalem. And you can see etched into the side the vessels of the temple being taken after this event. So if you go right next to the Colosseum, people often see an arch, but they don't know what it's about. Well, it's about Titus destroying Jerusalem and its sanctuary. The end will come like a flood, so it will come quickly, and it did. And everything will remain desolate, and it has. Go to Jerusalem today, closest Jewish people can get to is the Wailing Wall. Right? Can't even get to the Temple Mount because it's controlled by Palestinians. Right? So you go to the top of the Temple Mount. There's no temple. It's the Dome of the Rock, and it's still desolate. We're still in that gap period. The possibility of gap between the 69th and 70th week is established by the well-accepted Old Testament phenomenon of prophetic perspective, in which gaps such as between the first and second advents. In other words, we didn't see two advents in the Old Testament. We didn't see the church. It's a mystery. But we see a gap between the first 69 heptads and the 70th heptad. So, what is Daniel 9:27? We'll wrap this up now, verse 27. And he, who's he? The Antichrist, he will make a firm covenant with the many for 1 week. So the last heptad, what starts it? I think a confirmation of a covenant here. It'll be for one more heptad, one more 7-year period of time. So it doesn't, what starts this back up? Some sort of confirmation of a covenant. And in the middle of the week, he will stop a sacrifice and grain offering, and on the wing of the abominations will come. And so he's going to allow a temple to be rebuilt. Right? I think that's part of this peace treaty, probably with the Jewish people, allow them to rebuild the temple, which is going to be incredible that this person's going to be able to convince the Muslims and the Christians to, well, the Christendom, to rebuild a temple and to allow them to offer sacrifices again. But at the midpoint of that, he's going to set himself up to be worshipped. And Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 2:4, he's going to set himself above all other gods and demand to be worshipped. Revelation, we're going to see that the false prophet is going to lead that, and they're going to have to take the mark of the beast and worship this beast. So all of this is helping us to understand what's going to happen. Daniel 9:27. So we'll zoom in, Daniel 9:27, leaving out the first 69 heptads, just going to this last 7 years. It's yet future signing of covenant, abomination, desolation, great tribulation, and second advent. So Jesus talks about that, the abomination, the desolation, flee to the mountains, because if that midpoint after that will be great tribulation. So let's fill in this real quick. Right? This is the framework that Daniel provides us with to understand all of future prophecy. All the New Testament prophecy, I think, fills in the gaps here, the details. Progressive revelation. New revelation doesn't change old revelation, it builds upon it. And so we are in this unknown amount of years, this gap period, mystery of the church, next event in God's timetable, the rapture of the church, we receive our resurrected bodies. We'll be with the Lord forever, right? And so everything in blue is New Testament prophecy, New Testament revelation. Right? The three things that must precede the day of the Lord are this judgment. The wrath of God is the restrainer being removed. That's the first thing, right? The arrow going up. The second thing is the lawless one must be revealed during this period of time. And third, this apostasy must take place. And so the rapture doesn't start the tribulation period. The rapture doesn't start the day of the Lord. Daniel 9:27 says a confirmation of a covenant is what starts the timetable again this last 7 years, or the 70th heptad. And Matthew 24:15, Jesus says this abominable event will take place. Revelation 4-19, what we're going to look at, even better, verse chapter 6-18, this tribulation period. Matthew 24 also speaks of this tribulation period. And then at the second advent, the end of, Daniel 7, he'll arrive in the clouds. Revelation 19, he'll come at the end. He'll destroy the enemies of God and save Israel and usher in the kingdom. So all of that is built upon the foundation that Daniel provides us in Daniel 9:24-27. So I do think this structure is important to understand, to interpret the book of Revelation, specifically this time of tribulation from chapters 6-18. Okay. Mastered it. Everybody's got it down. All that information. Well, it's in the PowerPoint. If you have questions, I can answer it. But hopefully it is something you've already been introduced to in either eschatology or the book of Daniel, or you will see it more in your future classes. Have a good evening. I'll stay around for questions if there are any.